Sincere hearts and uncomfortable callings is this week's Right on Wednesday word. I'm in Philippians 2. So, the truth sometimes isn't very pretty. Even within the kingdom of God, sometimes the truth isn't pretty. And the Apostle Paul, he revealed or gave to us a very unpretty truth in the book of Philippians. So let me read it to you. This is Philippians 2, verse 20 through 21. It says, I have no one else like him who will show genuine concern for your welfare. For everyone looks out for their own interest, not those of Jesus Christ. Paul is talking about Timothy. So in this situation, Paul is in prison, and the Philippian church is in need of a spiritual leader, right? So Paul's in prison. Paul is saying that he's going to send Timothy to the church. And that's a good thing, because he's saying that, Timothy is like a son to him, and Timothy will edify them. Timothy will encourage them. Timothy will motivate them to keep going forth in their belief, just as Paul would have motivated them. And so that's a good thing. But the very tragic thing, the very sad thing is that Paul says that there's no one else like him who will show genuine concern for your welfare. And that's kind of a alarming and a very unfortunate statement. Out of all the preachers and teachers of that time, Paul thought that not many of them had sincere hearts. Many people of that time preached the gospel, they taught from the Bible, but Paul said that not many of them had sincere hearts. And when we look at Philippians 1, he says that some of them preached out of spite. They did it just to spite Paul. Some of them did it just for selfish ambition, meaning they did it only for themselves. Now, when we apply that to today, there are still many teachers and preachers who do not preach the gospel for Christ. They preach it for themselves. If this was a lesson learned then, it's also a lesson learned now. Some people don't preach Christ because of their love for God or for their love for people. They preach it for the love of power, and some people do it for the love of money. Whenever you're operating in a gift that God has given you, there is a measure of beauty and power and glory that God has bestowed upon you to draw men to him. But sometimes when you're operating in that beauty and in that glory, you can start to take that glory for yourself, and you can want that glory for yourself. So it can turn from God giving you a thing to glorify him, and then you end up glorifying yourself because you're operating in such beauty. When we think about Satan, the devil, the enemy, the adversary, when you go and read Ezekiel, and I want to say it's Ezekiel 38, but I'm not exactly sure, it tells us how beautiful Satan was. That was a gift from God. God glorified Satan. He was so beautiful. And obviously he had influence. He had power, a measure of power. And Satan, instead of using that beauty and that glory that God bestowed upon him and just turn it back into God, he used it for self. He went on a rampage and decided to influence others to follow him instead of following God. And so then Satan was cast down from glory. He was cast down, him and those angels were cast down because he used his power and his beauty for selfish ambition. Whenever we are pushing the gospel and teaching the gospel, and you're not doing it from a heart of love for God or his people, then you are operating demonically. Let me read this to you. This is James 3. I'm reading to you James 3, 13 through 15. It says, who was wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but it is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. So whenever we operate within our gifting to bring people to Christ, but you do it with selfish ambition, meaning you're doing it for influence, your own influence, or you're doing it because of the power, you're doing it because of the money, that's demonic. It does tell us in 1 Timothy, I think it's 1 Timothy 5:18, that a laborer or a worker in the gospel is worthy of their hire, meaning if you are in service to God's kingdom, compensation can be given to you and that you're worthy of that. But when you start to work for the kingdom only to receive compensation, that's when you're in error. That's when things get demonic. The reason behind, the motive behind preaching the gospel should be for the welfare of others and for the love of God. And anytime we do it for any other reason, it's demonic. We live in a very capitalistic society that teaches us that we are kind of like the center of our own world. We're encouraged to seek out education, wealth, and success, and often only for our own benefit. This is our culture here in America. And there's nothing wrong with achieving goals. There's nothing wrong with receiving accolades for the accomplishments that you receive. But when the driving force behind the things that you do for the kingdom is for self accolades, or you only do things for self, then that means the culture has infiltrated the hearts of believers in a very demonic, worldly way. The Bible tells us, Proverbs 4:23 tells us to guard our hearts, because out of it the issues of life flows. But sometimes culture and different people's opinions and things of the world can penetrate our hearts before we even have a chance to guard it. Sometimes the world penetrates our hearts and we're not even aware yet that we should have guarded our hearts against that thing. But God is always able to save. It's okay even if we didn't guard our hearts against some things. God is able to renew the heart, to renew the mind. But this is just a lesson. The first part of the title is called Sincere Hearts, because often, many times, just like Paul said, he said, I have no one else like him who will show genuine concern for your welfare. There are many people who preach and teach the gospel, and they don't do it for the welfare of people. They do it out of selfish ambition. And it's easy for that to happen when you live in a culture that pushes selfish ambitions on you from your youth. So what we need to do is pray. We need to pray for those who are in service to God. If you are a Christian, then you should be in service to God. And so pray for those who are working as servants in the kingdom, that they won't be influenced demonically or worldly, but they will be influenced by the Spirit of God and by the love of God. And pray that for yourself, that the work that you do in the kingdom is from a sincere heart, and that you're doing this because you love God and that you love others. Now, the second part of the article is uncomfortable callings. Now, there's this belief by some people that if God calls you to a thing, that it should come with peace. And I'm gonna work my way back around to that peace part, because it does come with peace, but I think not the type of peace that people expected. Some people expect the calling of God to not come with pressure, that you should feel at ease from the calling of God. Paul writes about a fellow worker, a fellow co-worker, if you will, in the gospel by the name of Epaphroditus at the end of Philippians 2. And Epaphroditus became ill. He became very sick. He became sick because of this. Philippians 2 verse 30, it says this: because he almost died for the work of Christ. He risked his life to make up for the help you yourselves could not give me. Epaphroditus is a prime example that sometimes the calling of God on your life is sometimes very uncomfortable. It was so uncomfortable for Epaphroditus that it almost led to his death. But we live in a world that will tell you that if your calling is uncomfortable, if your calling is too much pressure on you, then it's not from God. And that's just not biblically. If we're going by the Bible, biblically speaking, that is not the case. When you look at Moses, we know that Moses was called to be the leader of the Israelites. He led the Egyptians, or he led the Israelites out of Egyptian captivity. But that was a very uncomfortable calling for Moses. God called Moses in Exodus 4, and you see Moses debating with God. You see him saying, Lord, my speech, I can't go because of my speech. And he's asking all these questions. He's giving pushback because he's uncomfortable with the call. It comes with a lot of pressure, and he doesn't want to do it. But we know that Moses eventually, he went ahead and said yes to the calling. He went forth in it. But even within the calling, there was pressure. The people grumbled and complained against him and God so much that he didn't want to do it. In fact, when you read Numbers 11, verses 14 through 15, Moses asked God to kill him because the pressure was too much. He said that the burden is too heavy. But we sit up here and we think that if a call from God is uncomfortable, if it's a little uneasy, then it's not from God. Was not the calling of Moses from God? When you look at Saul, the first king of Israel, that was pressure. That call from God was pressure on him. He said, I'm the least. He said, I'm a Benjamite. I'm from the tribe of Benjamin. We're the least of the Israelites. I can't be king. There was pressure. That calling came with pressure. When you look at Gideon, he had some of the same sentiments. He said, I am the least. I am the weakest of the tribe of Manasseh. But God was calling him to be a warrior. That calling was a bit uncomfortable for him. It was out of his comfort zone. When you look at Hosea, his call was extremely uncomfortable. He was called to marry and be faithful to an adulterous prostitute. But that was the call on his life. And even when we go back to Philippians 2, the very writer, the very author of this book is Paul. And Paul's calling, of course, was filled with many sorrows. He wrote this while in prison. And while he's writing this, he's mentioning another worker by the name of Epaphroditus, whose calling is also uncomfortable, so uncomfortable, to the point that he got sick and almost died. So, uncomfortable callings within the kingdom of God is a very real thing. The calling is not always free of pressure, and it is not always filled with sweet dreams, lollipops, and butterflies. That is a false narrative. Sometimes it may very well be comfortable, and sometimes it's not. I said I will work my way back around to the peace. So although sometimes the calling in and of itself is uncomfortable, if we believe that God is our peace, and we believe what he says when he says that he will never leave us nor forsake us, then that means that peace never leaves us. Even in uncomfortable callings, peace doesn't leave us because God doesn't leave us. And so, this week's article is entitled Sincere Hearts and Uncomfortable Callings, because we need to have sincere hearts in our calling, in our service to God. It is very possible to preach and to teach and to work in the kingdom with hearts that's not right, with hearts that's not pure. And so I pray that you can pray for me, that I can pray for you, that we can pray for others who are in service to God, that we can do this with sincere hearts. And in that calling, even if that calling is uncomfortable, may the Lord bless us to still remain in it and not run from it because it's not comfortable, but may we stay in it and believe God when he says that he is with us and that he will not forsake us. Let us believe him and believe that he is our peace. So in the midst of the adversity, in the midst of the uncomfortable callings, we can have peace. And so that's it for you. That's it for y'all today. I completed Philippians 2 this week. Lord's willing, I will jump to Philippians 3 next week if that's what he has me to do. Again, this week's Right on Wednesday word is entitled Sincere Hearts and Uncomfortable Callings. I'm in Philippians 2. I pray this message has blessed you, encouraged you, and edified you. That's all I got. Until next time, y'all take care. All right. God bless you.